best is the Pinterest because they are the best.
Visit our website.
6 Minutes English.
From bbclearningenglish.com.
Hello and welcome to 6 Minute English, the show that brings you an interesting topic, authentic listening practice, and 6 new items of vocabulary. I'm Dan.
And I'm Neil. We'll be discussing the rise of those little graphics we call emojis and emoticons.
You know, I think emojis are a vital tool for communication, and actually, they're not that new either.
Oh, really?
Well, this is a perfect opportunity to ask this week's question. When was the first emoticon used? Was it A, 1606, B, 1862, or C, 1982?
It must be 1982. I'll go with C.
We'll find out if you're right or wrong later in the program.
You know, I think we should clear one thing up before we go any further. What's the difference between an emoticon and an emoji?
Good point. Emoticons came first. They're the images made using normal keys on a keyboard. Usually punctuation, letters and numbers. For example, a colon, 2 dots followed by the curved line of a closed bracket is
a smiley face.
Hey!
Something you use in way too many of your emails.
Well, thanks. Whereas an emoji is something completely different. It's an actual image. It could be a simple yellow smiley face, or something like the dancing lady, or even a bowl of noodles.
Ah, yes, all those little images we have in our phones. But you'll have to convince me, why do people use them so much?
Well, let's listen to Professor Viv Evans. He wrote a book called The Emoji Code.
They enable us to express emotion and empathy in digital communication. Increasingly, what we're finding is that digital communication is taking over from certain aspects of face-to-face interaction. In the UK today, for example, adults spend 22 hours online on average each week. One of the reasons emoji is so interesting is they really do enable us to express our emotional selves much more effectively.
Okay, so he used a very useful word, empathy. It means the ability to show you understand someone else's feelings. Okay, tell me more, Dan.
Yes, adding an emoticon can show you understand and express emotion and show empathy more clearly. In digital communication, we lack the visual signals we have in face-to-face interaction, as he says.
Interaction, meaning when people or things communicate with each other. We can also interact with things like machines, computers, and social media.
Yes, Professor Evans says 60% of information when we're talking to each other comes from non-verbal cues.
Wow, that's a lot. A cue is a signal that you need to do something.
For example, an actor goes on stage after their cue.
And non-verbal means without using spoken language. So here in the studio there are lots of other non-verbal signals about how we're feeling, non-verbal cues. For example, my facial expression, my body language, the look in my eyes, Dan.
There's a glint of rage in there somewhere, Neil. Okay, so let's apply this to digital communication. Imagine I sent you a text saying I hit my finger with a hammer. How would you respond?
Well, it depends. Did you hurt yourself badly?
If I followed it with a sad face emoji, then
I guess I'd know you hurt yourself. Oh, poor you.
But if I followed it with a laughing emoji, the one with the tears coming out because I'm laughing so much,
then I'd probably reply saying how stupid and clumsy you are.
Exactly. Without adding the emoji, it's hard to know my emotional state. The emoji is the non-verbal cue, like my facial expression.
By the way, is there an emoji meaning clumsy? Clumsy means physically awkward. Someone who's clumsy falls over a lot and drops things. Anyway, you were saying emoticons aren't as new as I think.
Yes, I asked when they were invented. Is it A, 1606, B, 1862, or C, 1982?
And I said 1982.
Well, in fact, a witty speech Abraham Lincoln reprinted in a newspaper as far back as 1862 included a semicolon with closed brackets.
Like a winking face?
Exactly. Although people think this was sadly just a typographical error, or what we normally call a typo.
A typo. A spelling mistake made when typing too fast or carelessly.
The official birth of emoticons is usually given as 1982, when a US professor instructed his students to use smiley faces to indicate jokes in a digital communication.
Wow, so they're over 30 years old. Maybe I should start using them. Let's round up with another look at today's words.
Sure. The first word we had was empathy. Do you have a lot of empathy, Neil?
Yes, I think I'm quite good at understanding other people's feelings. My friends tell me that. Anyway, it's important to empathise with your colleagues too.
That's not what I saw in your eyes. Yes, empathy is an important part of all human interaction.
Nicely done. If two people interact, it means they communicate with each other and react to each other. It's a pretty broad term.
We could also talk about the way children interact with the internet.
Way too much. Next up, we had non-verbal, meaning without spoken language. When I first travelled to Poland, I used a lot of non-verbal communication to get my message across. Hand movements, counting with fingers, things like that. Next word, Dan?
Next word. Aha! That is my cue to say the next word, which is in fact cue. A cue is a signal to do something. A commander could give his officer a cue to attack. Or I could give you a cue to sing a song.
No thanks, I'll stick with defining words, thank you. Like clumsy, meaning physically awkward. I'd have to say, Dan, you're a sporty guy, a talented footballer. You're not clumsy at all.
Well, that's what I thought until I broke my leg, after a clumsy opponent ran into me.
Ouch. Finally, we had type. Oh. No, hang on, that's not right. It should say typo. A typo is a mistake in a written document or a digital file or message.
Always check your scripts for typos before reading them, Neil. And that's the end of today's 6-Minute English. Please join us again soon.
And we are on social media too, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube. See you there.
Bye-bye.
6-Minute English.
From the BBC.
My photo taste is the Pinterest because they are the best.
To find out more,
Flick to link, link to flick.
So you probably have the sense, as most people do, that polarization is getting worse in our country. That the divide between the left and the right is as bad as it's been in really any of our lifetimes. But you might also reasonably wonder if research backs up your intuition. And in a nutshell, the answer is sadly yes. In study after study, we find that liberals and conservatives have grown further apart. They increasingly wall themselves off in these ideological silos, consuming different news, talking only to like-minded others, and more choosing to live in different parts of the country. And I think that most alarming of all of it is seeing this rising animosity on both sides. Liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans, more and more, they just don't like one another. You see it in many different ways. They don't want to befriend one another. They don't want to date one another. If they do, if they find out, they find each other less attractive. And they, more and more, don't want their children to marry someone who supports the other party. Particularly shocking statistic. You know, in my lab, the students that I work with, we're talking about some sort of social pattern. I'm a movie buff, and so, you know, I'm often like, what kind of movie are we in here with this pattern? So what kind of movie are we in with political polarization? Well, could be a disaster movie. Certainly seems like a disaster. Could be a war movie. Also fits. But what I keep thinking is that we're in a zombie apocalypse movie. Right? You know the kind. Just people wandering around in packs, not thinking for themselves, seized by this mob mentality as trying to spread their disease and destroy society. And you probably think, as I do, that you're the good guy in the zombie apocalypse movie, right? And all this hate and polarization, it's being propagated by the other people because we're Brad Pitt, right? Free-thinking, righteous, you know, just trying to hold on to what we hold dear, you know, not foot soldiers in the army of the undead. Not that. Never that. But here's the thing. What movie do you suppose they think they're in? Right? Well, they absolutely think that they're the good guys in the zombie apocalypse movie, right? And you better believe that they think that they're Brad Pitt and that we are the zombies. And who's to say that they're wrong? I think that the truth is that we're all a part of this. And the good side of that is that we could be a part of the solution. So, what are we going to do? What can we do to chip away at polarization in everyday life? What can we do to connect with and communicate with our political counterparts? Well, these were exactly the questions that I and my colleague Matt Feinberg became fascinated with a few years ago when we started doing research on this topic. And one of the first things that we discovered that I think is really helpful for understanding polarization is to understand that the political divide in our country is undergirded by a deeper moral divide. So one of the most robust findings in the history of political psychology is this pattern identified by John Haidt and Jesse Graham, psychologists, that liberals and conservatives tend to endorse different values to different degrees. So, for example, we find that liberals tend to endorse values like equality and fairness and care and protection from harm more than conservatives do. And conservatives tend to endorse values like loyalty, patriotism, respect for authority, and moral purity more than liberals do. And Matt and I were thinking that maybe this moral divide might be helpful for understanding how it is that liberals and conservatives talk to one another and why they so often seem to talk past one another when they do. So we conducted a study where we recruited liberals to a study where they were supposed to write a persuasive essay that would be compelling to a conservative in support of same-sex marriage. And what we found was that liberals tended to make arguments in terms of the liberal moral values of equality and fairness. So they said things like, everyone should have the right to love whoever they choose, and they being gay Americans, deserve the same equal rights as other Americans. Overall, we found that 69% of liberals invoked one of the more liberal moral values in constructing their essay. And only 9% invoked one of the more conservative moral values, even though they were supposed to be trying to persuade conservatives. And when we studied conservatives and had them make persuasive arguments in support of making English the official language of the US, a classically conservative political position, we found that they weren't much better at this. 59% of them made arguments in terms of one of the more conservative moral values, and just 8% invoked a liberal moral value, even though they were supposed to be targeting liberals for persuasion. Now, you can see right away why we're in trouble here, right? People's moral values, they're their most deeply held beliefs. People are willing to fight and die for their values. Why are they going to give that up just to agree with you on something that they don't particularly want to agree with you on anyway? If that persuasive appeal that you're making to your Republican uncle means that he doesn't just have to change his view, he's got to change his underlying values too, that's not going to go very far.
My photo taste is the Pinterest because they are the best.
Visit our website